Welcome back, Mainers. You have stumbled again on the hoMEviews podcast, an educational resource for homebuyers, homeowners, and everything in between. This week, we are talking with Scott Thistle about communications. Scott Thistle is the communications director for MaineHousing. Prior to joining the agency, he served as the State House Bureau Chief for the Portland Press Herald and Maine Sunday Telegram, a capstone to a 20-year journalism career covering state and federal politics in Maine and Minnesota. So you definitely know he knows what he's talking about. Please join us for an engaging conversation as we navigate the housing journey together. Welcome back, Mainers. This is the hoMEviews podcast, and today I have Scott Thistle here with me to talk about another departmental insight. So as I said last time, I'm from the homeownership department, but Scott is from a different department. So we're going to talk about some things that have to do with him today. How are you today, Scott?
I'm doing great, Maggie. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. It's great to have you. So I'll start off with our general question just to get the conversation started. Have you ever lived in a house you thought was haunted?
That's a good question, but I think I probably have lived in several houses that are probably maybe occupied by past residents or something like that. You know, I always feel like we kind of take up all the space that we live in, especially if it's a active family and stuff. So I definitely have sense that others have been there before, even in the house that I live in today.
Awesome. That's really cool. It seems to be a question that a lot of people are able to answer very easily um, if they've heard things moving at like a bump in the night or other things like that.
I think I always feel like that in especially old places and historic places that I kind of feel like a sense of the people that were there before us and always wondering about like what were they talking about, what were they doing,
Yeah.
what were their lives like.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's get right into it. So everyone here at MaineHousing knows you as the sort of master of communications, but let's get into the nitty gritty of what you actually do here. What is your job called?
My title is communications director, and you know I think saying that I'm the master of communications is very flattering, but I feel more like a facilitator or someone who helps us communicate and helps us tell the story of Maine housing in the work that we do here. So, I mean, that's it in a nutshell. I would say, you know, I'm not necessarily a master of anything. I kind of like am always learning, like everybody here, I think.
Oh, that's great. I mean, that's a very human perspective, right? That everybody's always learning in whatever position they're in. How do you feel like you help MaineHousing with its mission towards helping folks uh, stay in or acquire affordable housing?
You know, I think my role as communications director at its core is helping people understand what Maine housing does, sometimes what we don't do, and also, you know, how our programs support housing across the state. Housing policy is a complicated thing. I came to this work from journalism and I did a lot of different kinds of reporting in the course of my career. And the layers of complication that go into housing and affordable housing development, and even just you know the purchase of single family homes by first time home buyers, which you work in, all of that can be terribly complicated. And I think my big role is to try to uncomplicate things and make it simple or simpler for people to understand. Um, we focus a lot on transparency too here at Maine Housing because as a public agency, we want people to trust the information that they're getting from us. And our leadership here is really committed to we don't have a lot to hide, and so we don't act like it. So we share information as freely as we can, and when people ask us about things that we're doing. I mean, I also spend a lot of my time kind of monitoring news outlets, left-leaning news outlets, right-leaning news outlets that might be in the middle, alternative sources of news, social media channels, just to kind of always have a sense of how we're being perceived by the public and also what other issues might be rising up in the housing sphere that could become topics of interest for us or focus of our work here at Maine Housing.
That's awesome. It seems like there's a lot of research involved in your position as well, not just communicating with others or publishing things on the intranet for the employees to read.
Yeah, I think research in terms of learning which producers and writers and reporters are doing the hard work, digging in deep, um, and are giving us a fair shake, or are truly deeply interested in housing. And a lot of that is about building relationships with people and understanding what their needs are and what they're looking for. A lot of times it's time frames. Sometimes people will ask you a question and they expect you to have an immediate answer. And sometimes we don't have an immediate answer. So it's always trying to establish what their needs are, when they need something, how fast they need it, if we're going to be able to satisfy those requests, or if we're going to have to push them off a little bit so that we can get a good answer or get the correct answer or the most transparent answer that we can, instead of just kind of giving them any answer that comes to mind.
So, as far as the things that you yourself write, how do you choose what to publish, what not to publish?
That's a difficult question. I think part of what happens in my role is I'm writing things like newsletters, sometimes press releases, and we'll have something to announce, like if we make an award, or if something changes, or we have a new program that we're rolling out. All of that stuff is for me to kind of explain to the public, explain to our colleagues in the media what's going on, and kind of elaborate on those things. But it's always a team effort here. Senior leadership and also the folks who are just doing the work, um, if you will, down in the trenches. They're always involved in the kind of the creation of the narrative, because we don't want to have a false narrative. We want to have kind of authentic narratives that really show what we're doing. And so it's a big team effort in determining what we put out there and what we hold back.
Yeah. I like that you're highlighting the team effort and the building relationships. It seems like there are a lot of departments here that share that common goal. I know home ownership in general, we always think of things as a team effort, and we're always trying to build relationships with our partners, with our borrowers, all those kinds of things. So it seems like that's also where your focus is as well.
Yeah, I think planning and research as a department, we're kind of like, we often describe ourselves as the island of misfit toys, because we're sort of like this, we're sort of not like any other department in Maine housing, and yet our work touches every department in some way, or every department has work that passes through us in terms of whether it's messaging and marketing and communications about the work that we're doing, or about internal communications, about how we talk to and with each other inside the agency. And we're always kind of working to break down these stovepipes, if you will, so that we have more open lateral communications, and that the voice of our employees is truly getting lifted up and is able to be heard by our leadership team. And I think our leadership team does focus deeply on trying to like really listen to what employees say. We can't always give people the answers that they want, but we do want to give answers. And I think that a big part of answering questions is not just telling people how something is, but telling people why we take an approach that we're taking. And so if we lead with why something is, understanding, I guess, how it is a little bit easier for people.
Absolutely. Um, Another sort of difficult question. How do you feel the media sees Maine housing?
I have been here for about 4 years now, and I really feel pretty good that the press, when they approach us, they see us as a trusted source for information and news, because of our responsiveness, our transparency, and the access that we provide to our top leaders for hard questions or hard topics. Like, our agency director is always willing, almost always willing, to take a hard question from the press and go on camera and talk about it. Because going back to that piece on transparency, if we don't have much to hide here, the work we do is generally positive work. It's complicated work sometimes, and we have lots of challenges that we roll up against. But overall, our work is not. It's there. We're there to help the people of Maine, kind of obtain and secure and preserve safe and warm, affordable homes, and that's really good work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's um, wholesome, to say the least. So I'm sure um, being here for as long as you've been here, that's a really great way to describe the work that we do, and it's nice to hear that you feel as though the media outlets also seem to feel that way. Um, if the public is looking for the most reliable news source for Maine housing, where would you recommend they go and why?
Well, of course, I'm going to tell you that I think they should go to our website and look at our press release sections or just look at our homepage. We have all kinds of great information across our website, and that is MaineHousing.org. You can find all kinds of information there. I am a purveyor of all sources of information and many different types. And I find in left leaning, right leaning, and center leaning, or just mainstream media, I always find bits of information that are useful and helpful. I also frequently find bits of information in there that are a little bit off base, might not be quite right, might not be the whole story. There might be a piece missing, and this happens across the spectrum. So I think one of the things my role here is to kind of try to help shape narratives about our work and what we're doing. And that's kind of through a lot of times it's through conversations, just one on one. Pick up the phone and talk to a reporter about a story that they've written, or talk to them about a story idea that I think might be interesting for their readers or for their viewers. Sometimes those turn into stories, and then additional reporters will either mimic that or do a similar story. And so once we get that ball rolling sort of in the direction we want it to go, or in the narrative, if we're shaping the narrative the way we like it, it can be replicated. That's a big part of what we do is make sure that we're having open, honest, transparent conversations with trustworthy reporters. And we're not always looking for like a gimme. We're not looking for like the here's a what you call like a really like positive, just a positive story all the time, because housing is complicated and the conversations are difficult. And there's a lot of interests that are competing. For example, if there's a uh, multifamily property that's being proposed somewhere and community is resistant to it, sort of having the conversations with reporters to help them explain the value of bringing a new affordable property into the mix in that community and trying to show the positives of it. So we're not ever looking for a gimme. Like I said, housing is tough issues. I think having really candid conversations with folks is one of the things that I've learned. And sometimes being kind is not necessarily always being nice. Sometimes you have to just tell people the way it is. And when you do that with folks, and they know that they can count on you for that, that's when you get well, that's when you kind of develop the kind of trust in the relationship where people come to you and say, he's not always going to just give me a sugar coated answer, but he's going to try to give me the answer that is accurate and factual and on point. And also work really hard if we don't know the answer or if we're not the source, try to point them in the right direction or try to have them reach out to colleagues, partners, adjacent fields that we may not be the experts, but we might know who the experts are, and so to try to help reporters have those alternatives to us if we're not the right person to talk to.
Yeah. Um, speaking to the piece that you just said about how home ownership and housing is a difficult conversation to have. There's a lot of ins and outs. It's complicated, especially when you bring the legislature into it. Um, I I wanted to ask you another question just based off of what you had just answered. Um, who do you feel like is being left out of housing right now in Maine?
That's a really really difficult question, because I think there are so many sectors across the state where populations of people are not having access to the housing that they deserve or that they should be able to have. As we know, we're in a housing crisis. We've been working hard and diligently, at least for the 4 years that I've been here, and Maine Housing is like at historic production rates. We've had a lot of strong support from the legislature and from Governor Mills. I mean, Maine is one of the states where it seems across the aisles, both parties understand what's going on with housing, understand that we need to do more, that we're not doing enough fast enough. Um, and I think that's, that's really one of the big challenges. The focus on housing has been so intense because it's so needed. There are many, I'd say there are many sectors and many populations that are left out of the picture and need help and need affordable housing. Our work with homelessness, our homeless initiatives department, I think that's probably the most clear example of why we need to create more affordable housing is when we see these visibly unhoused populations of folks who really um, oftentimes no fault of their own are without housing and without the supports they need to get on their feet. And when we can get them there, it can really be a game changer.
Absolutely. So we just had Kelly Watson on the last episode, and she is the manager of the Homeless Initiatives Department. She gave us some numbers related to the amount of people that we have helped through our partners and everything that we communicate with all the time. But in the scope of the amount of people in Maine, they seem, even though it's a really great number, it's awesome numbers that we were able to help so many people, there are so many more that are out there that need help.
Yeah, that's true in a lot of different sectors, and I think it's really important to recognize that. We do like to not lose focus on the positive outcomes that we've had. I think of your department, for example. I always love seeing the home ownership numbers, and we see how many people we help buy that first home, and you think about what that really means for an individual or a family to get into that first home that they own, that's their own. I mean, that truly changes people's lives, right? Um, I sometimes get choked up thinking about it because I realize that it's going to change not only that person's life, but their kid's life, right? So there's like a generational shift that happens when someone can become a homeowner. And it's really powerful and rewarding work to think like I have a small little sliver, a little part of that I helped with. But
Absolutely. And the home ownership department did have record numbers for this past year of how many people we were able to help get into their first home. And some of those folks were even folks that had used some of our programs in the past. They had used a housing choice voucher. They had used one of the partners that's from the Homeless Initiatives Department. They had been in an affordable housing project that was done by asset management, so there's these threads that we can follow that are even more connected to us here who work here, which is pretty cool.
yeah, I think one of my favorite programs that's not really well known is the Family Self-Sufficiency Program that is run through our HCV department or our Restart program. That program is always inspiring because it actually helps people move up the ladder of success by giving them the economic tools and counseling and guidance to secure their own housing futures. And we often see those stories come out on the other side of somebody who was able to save up enough money to actually move from using a voucher to buying a house. And that to me is the truest example of success. And some people say, well, we're not doing it enough. We don't have enough people. But it's like if we change one family's lives today and another family's lives tomorrow, we're picking away at it. We're changing that person's lives. There's this old analogy about, or a little story about a little boy picking up starfish. I'm sure you heard it a million times. And starfish are washed up on the beach, and he's throwing them back into the ocean. And the old guy comes up to him and says, "What are you doing? You're never going to save them all." And the little boy says, "Well, I just saved that one." And I think that's kind of how we have to approach our work sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and getting stuck in the cycle of it is not a good way to come in and think about continuing the really great work that we're doing, right? To focus on, like you said, to focus on the positives of all of the people that we have helped over the past years.
Yeah, and when I have conversations with the media, a lot of times the focus is on all the people who need help, and we do try to returning to what was Kelly was saying, is pointing out all the people that we have helped. I think I try to shift the narrative back and remind people of all the people that we have helped and all the people that are moving forward, because there was a resource there and there was a team there to help move them forward. Um, we talk a lot about solving homelessness in Maine, and I've had some really deep conversations with reporters on background, on off the record. And I always say, people think that it's impossible. They say you're never going to solve homelessness, and I always tell them the first step in really accomplishing a difficult task is believing you can do it, right? So to me, I always say the first step in solving homelessness is we all have to believe we can do it. We have to have the political will to do it. We have to have the personal will to do it, but it's doable. We can send rockets up into space and then catch them when they're coming back down. We can solve homelessness. We just have to want to do it.
I think a lot of people would agree with you there. And for anybody listening who would like to see more of the resources that Scott has talked about, or that I have talked about, or if there are any abbreviations we've used that you're unfamiliar with, you can look in the show notes, and those things will be there for you to look at. Those are all the questions I had for you today, Scott. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk with our listeners about?
No, I don't think I have a lot to say. I just want, the one thing I would say is, at the end of the day, and that's a cliche, at the end of the day, communication and good communication is really about trust. And our job is to make sure people have clear, accurate information about what MaineHousing is doing and how our programs work. When you're transparent and you're consistent in your message, you build the kind of relationships that help people feel confident in the information they're getting. And then we're seen as a trusted source and not as just another arm of some agency that's out there in the ether, but actual real people. And when I come to work here every day at MaineHousing, I see real people who put their heart and their souls into their work every day. And it's really gratifying, it's really humbling, and it's really rewarding.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Scott. And hopefully we'll hear more from you soon.
Yeah, thank you, Maggie, and thanks for this podcast and for everything that you do in home ownership.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you for joining us for the hoMEviews podcast. We are always here to help and would love to answer your questions. Follow the link in the description to submit a question or comment for Maggie and the MaineHousing staff. A reminder that the views and opinions expressed in MaineHousing's homeownership podcast are those of the speakers or authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of MaineHousing. The opinions expressed should not be construed as legal or professional advice and are provided for informational purposes only. MaineHousing makes no representation or warranty of any kind regarding the accuracy, reliability, or completeness of any information provided on the podcast. Please see the full disclaimer in our show notes for more information. And again, thanks for listening.